It was the kind of quiet that only exists in high school cafeterias when everyone else is laughing except you. I wasn't unpopular, not really, I just didn't fit anywhere specific. Jake was the one who made sure I never disappeared completely. He dragged me out of my shell every day, whether it was with a stupid joke or by forcing me to eat lunch with him even when I said I wasn't hungry. We'd been best friends since middle school, back when we both still believed that life would make sense eventually. I was 16 then, maybe 17 now, time felt like it moved slower than ever. There were days when I couldn't wait to grow up, to leave everything behind, but there were also moments where I wanted to freeze time forever, just so I wouldn't have to face whatever came next. Jake lived in a house that always smelled like coffee and old books. His parents had this weird way of being present without actually being there. They were kind, sure, but not the type to ask too many questions. Mr. Carter, especially, he was calm, soft-spoken, the kind of guy who smiled more with his eyes than with his mouth. I remember thinking he looked like someone who knew how to listen. Not just hear people, but really listen. It was something I envied. Most adults talked over you, through you, like you weren't even there. But Mr. Carter didn't do that. He treated me like I mattered, like I had something worth hearing. One afternoon, after hanging out at Jake's house for a few hours, I realized I'd missed the bus. Jake offered to drive me home, but he got called into work last minute. That's when Mr. Carter stepped in. "Let me give you a ride," he said, like it was nothing. I hesitated for a second, not because I thought anything of it, but because I wasn't used to adults doing things like that without expecting something in return. But Mr. Carter didn't seem like that kind of person. So I said yes. The car ride should have been simple. 10 minutes max. But it didn't feel simple. It felt different. Not scary, not wrong, just unfamiliar. He asked me about school, about music, about what I wanted to do when I grew up. I answered honestly, which surprised me. Usually, I gave people the answers they wanted to hear, but with him, I found myself telling the truth. I told him I didn't know what I wanted yet. I told him I liked reading more than talking most days. I told him I sometimes felt like I didn't quite belong anywhere. And instead of brushing it off like most adults did, he nodded like he understood. When we pulled up to my house, I turned to thank him, and that's when I saw it. Not a look, not a gesture, just something. A shift in the air between us. He smiled, slow and warm, like he meant it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not just noticed, not just tolerated, but truly seen. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No thunder cracked across the sky. But something inside me shifted. I don't know if he noticed. I hope he didn't. Because if he did, that meant he felt it too. I got out of the car quickly, like if I stayed any longer, I might say something I wasn't ready for. I waved, walked up to my door, and went inside. But I didn't move for a while. I stood there, hand still on the doorknob, heart beating faster than it should. I told myself it was nothing. Just nerves. Just gratitude. Just the way sunlight hit his face as we drove. But deep down, I knew better. Something had changed. Something small, barely noticeable. But it was there. And I didn't know what to do with it. It took me a few days to stop replaying that car ride in my head. I told myself it was nothing, just a polite conversation with someone who happened to be kind. But the more I tried to forget, the more I remembered every detail, the way Mr. Carter's voice softened when he asked me questions, how his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the warmth of the afternoon sun as it poured through the windshield. I hated how much I thought about it. It felt wrong, somehow, like I was betraying Jake just by letting those thoughts linger. So I pushed them away. I focused on school, on homework, on anything that could distract me from the strange feeling growing inside me. But then came the message. A simple text from Jake. "Hey man, I'm going out of town this weekend. Dad's making steak tonight and says you should come over." I stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't unusual for Mr. Carter to invite me over. It had happened before when Jake was busy or away, but this time, something about it made my stomach twist. I wanted to say no. I wanted to pretend I had plans, that I was too tired, that I didn't feel like leaving the house. But part of me, the stupid, reckless part, wanted to go. Just to prove to myself that nothing had changed. that I hadn't changed. So I said yes. When I got to the house, Jake was already gone. His mom was visiting her sister, and the place felt oddly quiet. Mr. Carter answered the door wearing an old sweater and jeans, looking more like a friend than a parent. He greeted me with that same calm smile and waved me inside. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the kitchen, and I realized I hadn't eaten much all day. We talked while he cooked, easy and natural, like we'd done it 100 times before. He asked about my classes, my favorite books, whether I still played guitar. I answered without thinking, surprised by how comfortable I felt. Dinner was simple but good. Steak, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables. He poured us both glasses of soda and sat across from me at the small dining table. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people sharing a meal. And yet, something about the moment felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the lighting, dim and soft, or maybe it was the way he looked at me when I spoke, really looked like he cared about what I had to say. Or maybe it was just me, seeing things that weren't there. After dinner, we moved to the living room. He put on an old black and white movie I'd never seen before, and we watched it together, talking softly between scenes. He laughed at my jokes, even the bad ones. He shared stories about when Jake was little, about teaching him how to ride a bike, how he used to sing himself to sleep. I found myself laughing more than I had in weeks. I forgot, for a while, why I had been so nervous to come. And then, near the end of the movie, he reached over and gently touched my shoulder. Just for a second, just to emphasize a point he was making. But it sent a jolt through me, sharp and unexpected. I froze. He noticed. He pulled his hand back quickly, almost like he'd burned himself. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and unspoken. Then he cleared his throat and turned back to the TV. "Anyway," he said, voice lower now, "that's how you know someone really listens." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if he was still talking about the movie. We didn't mention the touch again. But I knew something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice. But I felt it. Like a thread had been pulled, and the whole fabric of our friendship, whatever it was starting to unravel. I left not long after the credits rolled. He walked me to the door, and as I stepped outside, he said, "You should come over more often." I smiled, nodded, and walked away. But I didn't look back. Because if I did, I might have stayed. And I wasn't ready to admit why. The visits started happening more often after that weekend. At first, I told myself it was just coincidence, Jake being busy, his mom traveling for work, Mr. Carter needing help organizing the garage or fixing something around the house. He always made it sound casual, like he was doing me a favor by giving me something to do, but deep down, I knew better. It wasn't about chores or boredom. It was about us. About whatever this quiet, unspoken thing was growing between us. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan any of it. But slowly, without realizing it, I began looking forward to those afternoons. They became the highlight of my week, the one place where I felt like I could breathe without pretending to be someone else. Jake never noticed. He was too caught up in school, in sports, in everything else that teenage boys usually care about. I think he thought I was just hanging out at his house because I liked the food or the movies or the company. He had no idea how much time I was actually spending there when he wasn't around. Mr. Carter and I fell into a rhythm. Some days we'd cook together, other times we'd sit on the couch and talk for hours. We watched old films, some black and white, some from the 80s, all with that kind of slow, thoughtful pacing that most people found boring. But not us. We loved them. We'd pause the movie just to argue over a character's motives or laugh at how outdated the fashion looked. Sometimes we didn't even watch the whole thing. We'd get so wrapped up in conversation that the credits would roll before we realized it. There were moments, small ones, that made my heart race in ways I couldn't explain. Like the way he'd lean in slightly when I spoke, like every word I said mattered. Or how he'd sometimes catch himself staring and quickly look away, as if he hadn't meant to. Or the way he'd brush against my arm while reaching for the remote, and how neither of us ever pulled away fast enough. One evening, it rained hard, the kind of storm that made the windows shake and the lights flicker. We were halfway through a movie when the power went out. For a second, we both froze. Then he laughed, a low, warm sound, and said, "Guess we'll have to rely on each other now." I don't know why, but that line stayed with me long after the lights came back on. We lit a few candles and sat closer than usual, sharing a blanket to stay warm. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and the room smelled like wood smoke and vanilla from the candle on the table. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, how normal. Like this was just two people, friends maybe, sitting together on a rainy night. But inside, I was unraveling. I wanted to say something. Anything. To ask him what this was, why he kept inviting me over, why he looked at me the way he did sometimes. But I couldn't. Because the truth was, I was afraid of what he might say. Afraid that if I gave voice to what I was feeling, it would disappear. Or worse, it would turn into something I couldn't handle. Instead, I just sat there, letting the silence stretch between us. And he didn't push. He never did. He let me take my time, let me find my own words. That's what made it harder. He never forced anything. It always felt like I was choosing it, even when I wasn't sure if I should. By the end of the night, the rain had stopped. He walked me to the door again, just like last time. But this time, when I turned to leave, he reached out and touched my arm. Just a light brush of his fingers, barely there. "Thanks for staying," he said quietly. "It means a lot." I nodded, throat tight, unable to speak. And then I left. But I didn't go straight home. I stood outside for a minute, breathing in the cool night air, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not exactly, but from something else. Something deeper. Something I couldn't name yet. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling for hours. I replayed every moment, every glance, every touch. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Just friendship. Just kindness. Just something innocent. But I knew better. And I think, deep down, so did he. I started to feel it everywhere after that night. The weight of something unspoken pressing down on me, even when I was alone. It wasn't just the visits anymore, or the conversations, or the way Mr. Carter looked at me sometimes like he was trying to memorize every part of me without saying a word. It was everything. The way my heart would skip when my phone buzzed and his name showed up on the screen. The way my stomach twisted every time Jake casually mentioned his dad in passing, like there wasn't this whole other world happening behind closed doors. The way I caught myself watching Mr. Carter's hands when he talked, or the way his voice softened when he said my name. The tension between us had changed. It wasn't just there anymore, it pulsed asterisk. Quiet, but undeniable. And the worst part, I didn't know if I wanted it to stop. I tried to pull away at first. I stopped answering texts as quickly. I made excuses when he asked me over. I told myself it was for the best. That if I stayed away long enough, the feeling would fade. But it didn't. If anything, it got worse. Not seeing him only made me think about him more. I'd find myself staring out the window during class, wondering what he was doing. I'd hear a song on the radio and remember how he used to hum along to it while we cooked dinner together. I'd dream about him, small, quiet dreams where nothing happened, and yet everything did. Then came the message that broke me open. It was late one night, and I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when his name popped up again. Just a simple text. "Hey. You okay?" That was all. No explanation, no reason why he was messaging so late. But somehow, it hit me harder than any confession ever could. He knew asterisk. He knew something was wrong. He knew I was pulling away. And instead of letting me go, he reached out. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I couldn't stop thinking about him, that I felt like I was drowning in all of this, that I didn't know what to do with the way my chest ached every time I saw him. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. So I wrote, "Yeah. Just tired." He replied almost instantly. "You sure?" I didn't answer right away. I sat there, holding my breath, knowing that whatever I said next would change something. I could feel it in my bones. Finally, I typed, "Not really." He didn't respond for a few minutes. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd gone too far. But then another message came through. This one different, more personal. "Can I see you?" My heart dropped. I should have said no. I should have told him I needed space, that this wasn't healthy, that we were both playing with fire and someone was going to get burned. But I didn't. Instead, I said yes. And that's when things started to spiral. He showed up at my house the next day. I hadn't told my parents he was coming, I didn't know how to explain it. So when the doorbell rang, I opened it slowly, expecting some kind of warning, some kind of hesitation from him. But he didn't look nervous. He looked relieved. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I whispered back. We stood there for a second, just looking at each other. And then he stepped inside like he belonged there. We ended up sitting on the couch in the living room, the same way we always did at his house. But here, in my own home, it felt different. More real. More dangerous. We didn't talk much at first. We just sat there, close but not touching. The silence between us was thick, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Then he turned to me, and for once, he didn't hide it. His eyes searched mine, slow and steady, like he was trying to read everything I wouldn't say out loud. And then, without a word, he lifted his hand and gently cupped my cheek. I froze. His touch was warm, careful, like he was afraid I might disappear if he held on too tight. And maybe I would have. Maybe I should have. But I didn't. I leaned into it, just slightly, closing my eyes for a second because I couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "I miss this," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. "Me too." He let out a soft breath, almost like he'd been waiting for me to say that. Then he pulled his hand back, shaking his head slightly, like he was scolding himself for crossing a line he knew he shouldn't have. "I shouldn't have done that," he muttered. But he didn't sound sorry. He sounded like he meant the opposite. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, heart pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. All I could think was, why are we doing this? Why can't we just stop? Asterisk. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Because neither of us wanted to. Because somewhere along the way, we had fallen into something we couldn't control. Something neither of us had planned. And now, no matter how hard we tried to pretend otherwise, there was no going back. I started lying more after that. Not just little white lies, real ones. The kind that made my stomach twist and my voice shake when I said them out loud. I told my parents I was studying at the library. I told Jake I was hanging out with other friends. I told myself I was doing this for a reason, that it wasn't hurting anyone, that I could stop whenever I wanted. But deep down, I knew better. The visits became more frequent. Not always at his house anymore. Sometimes we'd meet at coffee shops in different parts of town, places where no one would recognize us. Other times, he'd pick me up from school, pretending to be doing me a favor when really, we both knew what it was. We'd drive around for hours, talking about everything and nothing, music playing low in the background while the city lights blurred past the windows. He never touched me in public, not like that. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he'd reach over and rest his hand on mine for just a second. Just long enough to remind me that he knew I was there. That he wanted me there. We weren't doing anything wrong, at least, not technically. There were no kisses, no bedrooms, no broken rules in the way most people would define them. But still, it felt like we were breaking something. Something fragile. Something sacred. And every time I saw Jake, the guilt wrapped tighter around my chest. He didn't suspect anything. At least, not yet. He kept treating me the same as always, laughing too loud, shoving me playfully when I teased him, asking if I wanted to crash at his place again. But I found myself avoiding those invitations more often than not. It hurt too much to sit at his kitchen table knowing his dad and I had been sitting there just days before, sharing secrets we never meant to share. Still, I couldn't stop. It wasn't just about the thrill anymore, or the secrecy, or even the affection. It was deeper than that. It was the way Mr. Carter looked at me like I mattered. Like I was someone worth holding onto. Like I was brave instead of broken. With him, I didn't feel like a teenager caught between who I was and who I was supposed to be. I felt like me asterisk. And I didn't want to give that up, not even for Jake. But the weight of it all was crushing me. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment in my head. Wondering if I was making a mistake. Wondering if he ever felt the same kind of guilt. Wondering if, when he went home to his wife and kissed her goodnight, he thought about me the way I thought about him. Sometimes, when we were alone together, I tried to ask the questions I needed answers to. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I asked once, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me for a long time before answering. Every day, he admitted. But that doesn't mean it stops. I hated how honest he was. I wanted him to lie to me, just once, so I could convince myself that none of this was real. That I hadn't fallen for someone I wasn't supposed to love. Love. I didn't say it out loud, not then. But I knew. I knew asterisk. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about friendship or comfort or curiosity. This was love. Real, messy, complicated love. And I didn't know what to do with it. Jake noticed something was off, eventually. One afternoon, after I canceled plans with him for the third time in a row, he asked, "Dude, are you okay? You've been weird lately." I shrugged it off. "Just tired, I guess." He frowned but didn't push. "You sure?" "Yeah," I lied. That night, I sent Mr. Carter a message. I didn't know what I expected him to say, comfort, maybe. Or reassurance. But all he wrote back was, "I miss you." Asterisk. And somehow, that made it worse. Because I missed him too. So much it hurt. So I did what I always did when things got too hard to face. I showed up at his house unannounced. He answered the door looking surprised but not upset. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," I whispered back. He stepped aside without another word, letting me in like he already knew why I was there. We didn't talk right away. We just sat on the couch, close enough that our arms brushed when we moved. He reached for my hand, fingers interlacing with mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I don't know how to do this," I finally said, voice cracking. He squeezed my hand gently. "Neither do I, but we keep doing it anyway." He nodded slowly. "Because we can't stop." And that was the truth of it. We couldn't stop. Even when we should have. Even when we knew it was wrong. Even when we both understood that love wasn't always enough to make things right. We kept going. Because somewhere inside us, buried beneath all the guilt and fear and longing, there was still hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make this work. Even if we both knew that hope was dangerous. The breaking point came slowly, like a storm building on the horizon. Quiet at first, just a shift in the air, a heaviness that settled in my chest and never quite lifted. I could feel it in the way Mr. Carter looked at me during our meetings, how his touch lingered just a second too long before pulling away, how he sometimes stared out the window for minutes at a time without saying a word. There was something different about him now, not distance exactly, but a kind of quiet resignation, like he was holding onto something he knew he couldn't keep. I tried not to notice it at first. Tried to pretend everything was the same as it had always been. But it wasn't. And deep down, I think I always knew it wouldn't last forever. It started with small things. He stopped reaching for my hand when we were alone. He hesitated longer before replying to my messages. When I showed up at his house unannounced one evening, expecting the usual warm smile and quiet relief, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, the light above us flickering slightly like even the house was tired of keeping secrets. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just worn down. "Hey," I said softly, closing the door behind me. He looked up, eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. "You shouldn't be here." My stomach dropped. "Why not?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Because this isn't fair." "To who?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "To me," he admitted, and the words hit harder than I expected. "To you asterisk. To everyone." I stepped closer, heart pounding. "What are you saying?" He didn't answer right away. He just sat there, staring at me like he was trying to memorize every part of me before I disappeared. Then, finally, he said, "We need to stop seeing each other like this." The room felt like it tilted beneath me. "Stop." Like, completely. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what else to do." I shook my head, stepping forward until I was standing right in front of him. "So that's it. You're just going to walk away." "I'm trying to do the right thing," he said, voice strained. "Then why does it feel like you're punishing me?" His eyes softened, and for a second, I thought he might change his mind. Thought he might pull me into his arms and tell me it was all going to be okay. But he didn't. He just looked at me, and then he said the words that broke me open. "I can't keep hurting my family." That was all. No explanation, no reassurance, no promise that this would ever be okay again. Just those 5 words, spoken so quietly I almost didn't hear them. But I did. And they cut deeper than anything else ever had. I backed away from him slowly, shaking my head like maybe if I walked out now, none of this would be real. So that's it, I muttered. You're just done. No, he said quickly, standing up. That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? I snapped, voice cracking. Because I don't understand anymore. I don't know what we're doing or why we're pretending like this is just some little secret we can forget about. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing in his eyes. I care about you, okay. That's not going to change. But this isn't healthy. It's not fair to either of us. Then why did you let it happen? My voice was raw now, full of emotion I couldn't control. Why did you keep inviting me over? Why did you keep touching me if you knew this was going to end like this? He flinched like I'd hit him. And then, for the first time since we'd started this whole mess, he looked like he might cry. Because I fell in love with you, he said, voice barely audible. And I didn't know how to stop. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and devastation. I had spent so long waiting to hear those words, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way I did. And now, hearing them, really hearing them, it didn't bring relief. It brought pain. Because it changed nothing. Because loving someone didn't fix reality. Because even if he meant it, even if he truly loved me, it still wasn't enough to make any of this right. I turned away from him, wiping furiously at my eyes before the tears could fall. You should have told me sooner. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, voice thick with regret. Well, congratulations, I muttered bitterly. You failed. I stormed out before he could say anything else, slamming the door behind me. The night air hit me like a slap to the face, sharp and cold, but I didn't care. I just kept walking, faster and faster, like if I moved fast enough, I could leave everything behind. But I couldn't. Because no matter how far I went, the truth stayed with me. He loved me. And that was the worst part. Because now I knew for sure, I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't made it up in my head. He did love me. But love wasn't enough. Not for this. Not for us. I stopped answering his calls after that night. Not because I didn't want to. Not because I didn't need to. But because every time my phone rang and his name showed up on the screen, something inside me twisted in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just anger or sadness, it was everything all at once. The guilt, the longing, the pain of knowing what we had and what we'd lost. And I couldn't face it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. At first, he kept trying. Texts came in slow at first, then more frequent. Please talk to me. I need to see you. You can't just walk away from this. But I did. I walked away from everything. His messages, his house, even Jake's place when I knew there was a chance he might be there. I avoided the coffee shops we used to go to, changed my route to school so I wouldn't pass by his car on the street. I erased him from my life as best as I could, like if I stopped seeing any trace of him, maybe I'd forget how much he mattered. But forgetting didn't work. Not really. Jake noticed something was wrong before long. He asked about it casually at first. Hey man, you still hanging out with my dad? He said you've been busy. I shrugged it off, told him I had too much going on with school. He didn't push. Not then. But then came the slip. It was stupid, really, just a moment that shouldn't have meant anything, but somehow ended up meaning everything. Jake and I were at his house one afternoon, sitting on the couch watching TV like we always did. His mom was in the kitchen making tea, and Mr. Carter was home for once, somewhere upstairs. We were halfway through an episode when Jake's phone buzzed. He picked it up, frowned slightly, then looked at me. Dude, why does Dad have your number? I froze. What? I asked, voice coming out sharper than I intended. He tilted the screen toward me. A message lit up the display. Mr. Carter. Asterisk asterisk, can we talk? Please. Asterisk. I don't know what I expected in that moment, denial, confusion, maybe even a joke. But not the look on Jake's face. Because he knew asterisk. Not everything, not yet. But he saw something shift in me, something flicker behind my eyes, and suddenly, everything clicked into place. His expression hardened. What the hell is this? I swallowed hard, throat dry. It's nothing. It doesn't look like nothing, he snapped, standing up now. How long has this been going on? I shook my head. It's not like that. Then what is it like? His voice was rising now, anger bleeding into every word. Because it looks like my dad has your number and keeps texting you like it's normal. Like it's okay. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. There were no words that would make this better. No explanation that would erase what he was starting to understand. Jake took a step closer, jaw clenched. Tell me the truth. And I did. Not all of it, not right then, but enough. Enough to shatter whatever trust we had left between us. I told him about the visits, about the conversations, about how it started as friendship and turned into something neither of us planned. I told him I never meant for it to happen. That I tried to stop it. That I hated myself for hurting him. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at me, like he was trying to decide whether I was lying or just crazy. Then he laughed, short, bitter, empty. So that's why you stopped coming over. I nodded slowly. Yeah, and Dad, he knew. I hesitated. He didn't plan it either. It just happened. Jake's face twisted with something between anger and betrayal. You lied to me. I didn't want to. You did, he snapped. Every time you were at my house and I wasn't there, every time you said you were doing homework when you were really with him, you lied to my face. I didn't argue. Because he was right. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. I can't believe this. My best friend. My dad. I flinched at the way he said it, like it was some kind of crime. And maybe it was. I'm sorry, I whispered. Jake looked at me for a long time. Then, without another word, he grabbed his keys and stormed out the door. That was the last time we talked for weeks. After that, I disappeared. I stopped showing up at school most days. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, barely eating, barely breathing. My parents asked what was wrong. I told them I was just stressed. They didn't believe me, but they didn't push. Maybe they could see how broken I already was. Mr. Carter tried reaching out again, but I didn't respond. Not once. I deleted his messages without reading them. Blocked his number. Changed mine. Anything to keep him away. But even then, even when I thought I had shut him out completely, I still heard from him one last time. A letter arrived in the mail. No return address. Just my name written in his handwriting. I almost threw it away. But I didn't. Instead, I opened it late at night, heart pounding like I was about to read something I wasn't ready for. And I was. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't try to explain himself again. He just wrote, I never meant to hurt you. Or Jake. Or anyone. But I can't lie to myself anymore. I loved you. I still do. And I know that doesn't fix anything. I know that love isn't always enough. But I needed you to know the truth. Even if it changes nothing. Asterisk. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it away. Not because I wanted to remember. But because I knew I never could forget. Time passed. Not quickly. Not painlessly. But it moved forward, like it always does, whether you're ready for it or not. I don't remember exactly when things started to feel different, when the weight on my chest became lighter, when the guilt stopped waking me up in the middle of the night, when I could walk past a coffee shop without seeing him in every shadow. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow unraveling of everything that had built up inside me, piece by piece, until one day I realized I hadn't thought about him in hours. Or a whole day. Or even longer. Jake and I never really talked again after that. We saw each other at school, of course. Sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in class. He'd glance at me, but we never made eye contact for more than a second. Never said more than a few words if we had to. I knew he was still angry. Maybe hurt. Maybe confused. And I didn't blame him. I wouldn't have forgiven me either. There were times I wanted to say something, anything, that might fix what I broke between us. But what could I have said? That I was sorry. That I never meant for any of it to happen. That I missed him. That I missed us. He probably already knew all of that. And none of it would have changed anything. Eventually, graduation came. Jake left for college out of state. I stayed behind, not because I had plans, but because I wasn't ready to leave the place where everything had gone so wrong. I watched him go with a quiet ache in my chest, knowing that whatever we used to be, best friends, brothers in all but blood, it was gone now. And I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. As for Mr. Carter, I heard through mutual silence that he and his wife separated not long after everything fell apart. I never got the full story. I didn't ask. I think part of me already knew why. Not because of me, not directly, but because of everything that had shifted between them, the space he had filled with something else, someone else. Someone like me. He moved away after that. Took a job somewhere else. Somewhere new, where no one knew his name or mine. I guess he was trying to start over. Just like I was. I never reached out to him. Never sent a message. Never called. I deleted his number the same day I decided to let go. Because I knew that if I heard his voice, if I saw his face, I might forget why I had to leave. And I needed to remember. Because loving him wasn't enough. Because wanting him wasn't right. Because sometimes, even when two people care deeply for each other, love isn't the answer. It took me years to understand that. Years to stop blaming myself for falling for someone I wasn't supposed to. Years to stop wondering what our lives would have been like if things had been different. If he had been younger, if I had been older, if we had met at another time, under better circumstances. But life doesn't give you those kinds of second chances. It just gives you time. And eventually, it gives you healing. I'm not the same person I was back then. I'm older now, wiser. I've learned how to live with the choices I made, even the ones I still regret. I've found peace in the fact that some stories don't have happy endings. Some are just lessons. Some are meant to teach us who we are, even if they break us along the way. I've dated since then, not many people, not serious relationships, but enough to know that I can love again, that I can be loved in return, that I don't have to hide who I am anymore, that I don't have to be afraid of my own heart. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about him. Not often, not for long, but sometimes. I wonder where he is now. If he's happy, if he's found peace too. If he still thinks about me the way I used to think about him. I hope he has. I hope he's found something real, something honest, something that doesn't come with guilt or secrecy or the weight of broken trust. Because he deserved that, and so did I. This story isn't about forgiveness. Not completely. It's about truth. About learning to live with the parts of yourself that don't fit into neat little boxes. About understanding that love isn't always simple. And sometimes, it asks more from us than we're ready to give. If you're listening to this and you see yourself in these words, if you've ever felt something you couldn't explain, if you've ever loved someone you weren't supposed to, I want you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to justify your feelings. You don't have to apologize for who you are. And you don't have to carry the weight of your past forever. Because healing is possible. Because moving on doesn't mean forgetting. And because sometimes, the most important thing we can do is simply survive. So if this story moved you, please hit that like button. If you've ever felt something you couldn't explain, drop a comment below. You're not alone. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter. Because sometimes, hearing someone else's truth helps us find our own.